He lived in a large, quiet house at the edge of the city, the kind of place people slowed down to look at as they passed by. The gates were tall, the walls clean, and the windows always shined. From the outside, it looked like the perfect reward for a man who had worked hard and won at life. Inside, everything had its place. The floors were spotless. The furniture was modern and expensive, but rarely used. The house felt more like a showroom than a home. The man who lived there woke up every day at the same time. He exercised, showered, dressed, and ate breakfast in silence. His phone was always full of messages, numbers, and deals, but very few were personal. He was known as someone who built his wealth from nothing. People admired him for his discipline and focus. He believed emotions were distractions and routine was power. That belief had carried him far. By the time he left for work each morning, the house was already in perfect order. That was not by accident. The housekeeper arrived before sunrise and left after sunset. She moved quietly, almost like she didn't want to be noticed. She cleaned, cooked, washed, and fixed things that no one else would see. When she worked, she didn't stop unless she had to. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then, her voice was soft. The man respected her work, but he didn't really know her. To him, she was reliable, careful, and invisible in the way many working people are to those who hire them. He paid her well compared to others, and in his mind, that was enough. Fair pay meant fairness. He never asked about her life, and she never offered details. In the evenings, he usually came home late. Most nights, the housekeeper was already gone. On the night she was still there, he would nod politely as he passed through the hallway or kitchen. She would nod back, quickly gathering her things, ready to leave. One night, as he walked down the stairs to get a glass of water, he noticed something different. The house was quiet, but he heard a small sound near the back door. It was not loud enough to be obvious, but it was there. A sharp breath, then another. He paused. The housekeeper was standing by the door, her back turned to him. Her shoulders were shaking. One hand was pressed to her face, the other gripping her bag. She was crying. He froze. He didn't know why. He had seen people cry before, of course, in meetings, on the news, in movies, but this felt different. This was happening in his house, in the space he controlled, and it wasn't planned or explained. Before he could say anything, she wiped her face quickly, opened the door, and stepped outside. The door closed softly behind her. He stood there longer than he meant to, staring at the door. His first thought was that it was none of his business. Everyone had bad days. People cried for all kinds of reasons. He told himself to forget it, but he didn't. The next day passed like any other. Meetings, calls, numbers moving on screens. Yet his focus slipped more than usual. That image stayed with him. The way she tried to hide it, the way she cried as if she had done it many times before. That evening, he came home earlier than usual. The housekeeper was still working. He noticed small details he had never paid attention to before. The slow way she moved when she thought no one was watching. The dark circles under her eyes. The way she checked the time often, like she was racing against it. She avoided eye contact more than usual. When she spoke, her voice sounded tired, stretched thin. Again, when it was time for her to leave, he stayed in the living room, pretending to read on his tablet. From the corner of his eye, he watched her put on her coat. She stood still for a moment, took a deep breath, and turned her face away. Her hand went to her mouth. He didn't hear the sound this time, but he saw it clearly. The tears came fast. She tried to stop them, pressing her lips together, but her eyes betrayed her. For a few seconds, she let herself feel it. Then she wiped her face, straightened her back, and walked out. This time, he knew it wasn't just a bad day. Over the next week, the pattern repeated. Not every night, but often enough that he couldn't ignore it. Always near the door, always alone, always quiet. She never cried during the day, never complained, never slowed down her work. It was as if she saved her pain for the moment she was no longer on the clock. The man found this deeply unsettling. His life was built on control. Problems had solutions. If something broke, it was fixed or replaced. If someone failed, they were removed. But this was different. This was human, messy, and hidden. He started noticing how little he knew about the people who kept his life running smoothly. The drivers, the cleaners, the guards. He knew what they did, but not who they were. One evening, he stayed late in his office and returned home close to midnight. The house was dark, but the kitchen light was on. He frowned. That was unusual. The housekeeper was there, sitting at the table. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her phone was in her hands. Her shoulders were slumped, and her face looked empty, like all the strength had drained out of it. Then the phone rang. She answered quickly, standing up as if that might help. He stayed still, hidden by the wall. Her voice shook as she spoke. She tried to sound calm, but it didn't last. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm trying. Please, just give me a little more time." There was a pause. He couldn't hear the other voice, but he could see the effect it had on her. Her eyes filled again. Her free hand trembled. "I can't lose it," she whispered. "I'll find a way. I promise." When the call ended, she lowered the phone and covered her face with both hands. This time, she didn't try to hide it. Her body shook as she cried, deep and silent, like she was afraid even the walls might judge her. Something tightened in the man's chest. It was an uncomfortable feeling, one he usually avoided. He had spent years building walls around himself, so he would never feel helpless. Yet here he was, watching someone break down his own kitchen, and he didn't know what to do. He stepped back quietly and went upstairs, leaving without being seen. That night, he didn't sleep well. His mind kept replaying what he had witnessed. He wondered how long she had been carrying whatever burden this was. He wondered how many people around him were doing the same, unseen and unheard. By morning, the house was clean again. Breakfast was prepared. Everything looked normal. The housekeeper greeted him politely, as always. Her eyes were slightly red, but she smiled anyway. He nodded back, but this time the nod felt heavy. For the first time in a long while, he realized something important. His house was full of comfort, but not warmth. It was full of success, but not understanding. And somewhere between the quiet rooms and polished floors, a person was hurting deeply, right in front of him. He didn't yet know why she cried every night, but he knew he could no longer pretend he hadn't seen it. He started noticing small details he had never paid attention to before, little things that didn't seem important at first. The way she walked into the kitchen, careful not to touch anything out of place. The way her hands trembled ever so slightly when she carried a tray of dishes. The way she checked her watch more than once an hour, always calculating how much time she had left before she had to leave. These things were subtle, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention, but to him, they suddenly seemed loud. During the day, she moved around the house as usual. She cleaned, polished, organized, and cooked with a quiet efficiency that made the house shine. There was no complaint in her voice, no sign of her struggles. She smiled politely when he spoke to her and nodded when he gave instructions. On the surface, she was perfect at her job, but he began to wonder what went on behind that calm exterior, what she was holding in those silent, heavy moments after he left. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in his office, he realized he had left his keys downstairs. He went down, expecting to find the house quiet and orderly as usual. Instead, he found her in the living room, folding laundry, her face tight with concentration. But there was something else there, too, a faint shadow behind her eyes, something he hadn't noticed before. She paused mid-motion and looked up briefly, her expression quickly smoothing back into calm. He froze for a moment, realizing how rarely he saw this side of her. Then she returned to her work, but he could not look away. The next few days were no different. He tried to focus on his work, but every time he came home, he kept noticing the same things. A hand pressed to the side of her face, a side that seemed too long, a slight slump in her shoulders. He realized she was carrying something heavy, something that money alone could not fix, at least not the way he usually solved problems. He tried to push the thoughts away, reminding himself that he had enough of his own work and his own worries. But it was impossible. Every night, he remembered the sound he had heard and the sight of her shoulders shaking. He could not erase it from his mind. One evening, he decided to stay in the living room, pretending to read a book while she finished her work. He did not speak, not even to ask a simple question. He just watched quietly from across the room. She moved around, putting dishes in their places, straightening cushions, and then, as always, her phone buzzed. He noticed the way she jumped slightly, her body tensing the instant she saw the screen. Then she stepped away to answer it, speaking softly, quickly, as if trying to finish before anyone could hear. He could not catch what was being said, but he could see the effect it had on her. She gripped the phone tightly, her knuckles white, her jaw pressed hard. After a few minutes, she ended the call and sank into a chair, rubbing her face with her hands. He realized she was tired in a way he had never experienced. Not just tired from work, but worn down by something heavier. Something that made every movement deliberate and every gesture careful. She worked like she was holding herself together with thread, and for the first time, he felt a pang of helplessness. Normally, he could fix anything with money, influence, or a plan. But this, he had no idea how to help. He did not even know what the problem was. For the next week, he began to observe her even more closely. He noticed the small habits that revealed her worry. She double-checked the windows and doors before leaving. Even though the house was secure, she lingered for a few moments at the window, looking out, almost as if she was waiting for someone or hoping for something. She avoided talking about her life or answering questions about her family. She rarely laughed, and when she did, it felt like a borrowed sound, not real joy. One night, he came home earlier than usual. He was tired, but something told him to go back before his usual time. The house was quiet. She was still in the kitchen, putting away dishes. When she noticed him, she smiled politely and nodded, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she adjusted her apron nervously, as if she were trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. He decided to sit in the living room again. This time, he did not pretend to read. He just watched and waited. He wanted to understand, to see the person behind the calm, quiet exterior. He noticed how she moved from room to room, cleaning and organizing, her motions efficient but tight, almost mechanical. She paused often, wiping her forehead, taking deep breaths, as if she were trying to catch her strength back. Every now and then, she glanced at the clock, her eyes betraying the worry she carried silently. As he watched, he noticed how careful she was with the small things. A spill cleaned immediately, a cushion fluffed precisely, a picture frame adjusted to be perfectly straight. He realized that every tiny act was not just work. It was a way to hold herself together, a way to create some control in a life that he sensed was far from controlled. For the first time, he felt a real connection to someone in his home, not a transactional one, not one based on service or money, but a human one. Someone was carrying a burden, and it was happening right in front of him. A few days later, he overheard another phone call. She thought he was not listening, but he was closer than he realized. Her voice shook as she spoke, barely above a whisper. He could not hear all the words, but he caught a few. "I'm doing my best," she said. Then, "I can't make any longer," followed by a pause, and, "Please, just a little more time." She sounded exhausted, desperate, and frightened. The man felt something shift inside him. Up until that moment, he had always believed problems could be solved with money or action. But this required understanding first. He realized he had no idea how to help her. He did not know what to do. That night, he could not sleep. He kept thinking about her, about the life she must lead outside the house, about the weight she carried and the courage it must take to come to work each day and appear calm. He thought about how invisible she had been to him before, not because he did not see her, but because he had never really looked. It was easier to ignore what he did not understand. But now it was impossible. He started noticing other things in the house, too. The small notes she left for herself, reminders on the fridge, the careful way she arranged supplies so nothing was wasted, the worn shoes she wore while cleaning, the thin coat she put on during cold mornings. Every detail told a story of someone working harder than anyone could imagine, someone who cared more than anyone around her realized. And every night, she cried alone, hidden from the world, as if no one would care if she fell apart. One evening, he made a decision he had never made before. He would speak to her, not about the work, not about money, not about tasks, but about her. about the person he had seen through small, broken moments. He hesitated. What would he say? How would she react? He had no experience with this. He had always been the one giving orders, not offering comfort. Yet he could not keep pretending he did not know. The next day, he came home, trying to act casual. She greeted him politely, as always. He poured himself a cup of tea and sat down nearby, in plain view, but not in a way that would make her uncomfortable. He spoke softly, hesitating. "Are you okay?" he asked, almost more to himself than to her. She froze, a dish in her hand, then smiled politely and shook her head slightly. "Yes, I'm fine," she said quietly. But the smile did not reach her eyes. He could see the tension, the exhaustion, the worry still there. He realized that no words could force the truth out of her. She would speak only when she was ready. For now, he had to wait and observe, continue to understand. He had to respect her privacy while staying present, showing her that she was seen and valued, not just as a worker, but as a person. Over the following week, he tried small gestures, a warm cup of tea left for her, a kind word in passing, a small smile without expectation. Nothing grand, nothing intrusive, just subtle acknowledgement that he saw her, that he noticed her effort and her courage. He could tell it mattered, even slightly, because her movements softened. She still carried her burden, but she seemed less alone. She still checked her phone, still bit her lip, still pressed her hands to her face, but the quiet gestures of care mattered. He also began reflecting on his own life. He realized he had surrounded himself with people he paid to be efficient, people who served his routines, and yet he had rarely seen them. He had a home full of perfection, but it was not full of life. It was full of appearances. Now, for the first time, he felt a real responsibility for someone, not as a task to manage, not as a project, but as a human being. Someone he could help, someone he could support, someone whose life could be lighter because he cared. And so he waited carefully. He continued to watch, to notice, and to think. Every night, when she left and wiped her eyes, he felt the weight of the unseen burden she carried. And every day, as she moved to the house, he learned more about patience, empathy, and the silent strength of a person who gives everything they have, even when life is hard. He didn't yet know the full story of why she cried. He only knew that it mattered, that her life mattered, and that for the first time in many years, he felt something he had not felt in a long time, true concern, and the urgent need to understand someone beyond the surface, beyond appearances, beyond what money could fix. He had been watching her quietly for days, noticing the small habits, the moments of tension, and the silent pain she carried. But he still didn't know the reason behind her tears. The mystery weighed on him. Every night, he would think about her, imagining all the possible struggles she might be facing. He knew it was delicate. Some things could not be solved with money alone. Some things needed understanding, patience, and trust. One evening, he made a choice he had never made before. He decided he could not wait any longer. He waited until she had finished tidying the living room. She was collecting the last of the dishes from the table, moving slowly, her hands trembling slightly. He cleared his throat softly so she would notice him without being startled. She looked up, startled for a moment, then quickly smiled politely and nodded. He gestured toward a chair near the window. "Please, sit for a moment," he said gently. His voice was calm, careful, trying not to startle her. She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the door, as if calculating her options, then slowly sat down. He kept some distance, not wanting to crowd her, just enough to show he was present and listening. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She stared at the floor, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He could see her nails were worn, the skin rough from hard work. He noticed the way her eyes darted to the clock, then back to him, as if she were ready to flee. But he did not rush her. He waited. Finally, he spoke softly. "I see you," he said. "I see you working so hard every day. I notice the effort, the care, and I notice when you are hurting. You don't have to hide it here. You don't have to pretend." Her head snapped up, surprised. For a moment, he thought he had gone too far. Her lips trembled, and she shook her head slightly. I'm fine," she whispered. But the words were weak, like a shield that had cracks. He leaned back slightly and softened his tone. I don't want to push you. I just want you to know that you are seen. You are not invisible here. If there is something you are struggling with, you don't have to carry it alone. Her hands tightened even more in her lap. For a few seconds, she didn't move, didn't speak. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, she began to talk. At first, it was just fragments. Her voice was low and shaky. She spoke about long nights and early mornings, about exhaustion and worry. She spoke about her son, how he'd been sick for months, how the bills kept coming, and how she didn't know where to turn. She talked about the fear of losing her home, the fear of not being able to care for a child, the weight of feeling like she had no one to rely on. As she spoke, he listened quietly. He did not interrupt. He did not try to fix anything immediately. He only listened. Every word she said painted a picture of life that was harsh and unrelenting, a life that had demanded strength beyond what most people could imagine. He could feel her pain in the pauses, in the small quivers of her voice, in the way her hands gripped each other. I work every day, she said finally, her voice cracking, and still it is never enough. I cry when I leave, because I feel like I am failing. I try, I really try, but the world doesn't make it easy. And at night, I feel so alone. He felt a lump in his throat. He had never expected to hear words like these in his own home, in the space he had always considered orderly and controlled. Her life had been hidden in plain sight. He realized that her tears were not random or weak moments. They were the expression of a life filled with struggle, love, and responsibility. Why didn't you tell anyone? He asked gently. Why keep this hidden? She looked down, ashamed, because no one would understand. And I didn't want pity. I just wanted to do what I could. Her voice was almost a whisper. And if I stop crying when no one is looking, I could pretend everything is okay, at least for a few hours. He nodded slowly. He understood more than he had realized he could. Her life was not easy. Her courage was quiet but immense. She had been holding herself together under pressure that most people could not imagine, and she had been invisible to almost everyone, except him now. He stayed silent for a few moments, letting her words settle. Then he spoke again. I don't want you to feel alone anymore, he said. I want you to know that there are people who care. You don't have to carry this all by yourself. Her eyes met his briefly, wide with a mixture of fear and hope. She wanted to believe him. But years of struggle had made her cautious. It's not that simple, she said softly. Even if someone cares, it doesn't fix what is happening. My son, the bills, everything. He nodded. I know. I don't have all the answers, but I want to help you find a way. I don't want to watch you suffer alone anymore. You shouldn't have to. Tears welled up in her eyes again, and this time she did not hide them. She wiped them quickly, but the man could see how heavy her heart had been. Her voice shook as she spoke again, sharing more about her son's illness, the doctors, the medication she could barely afford, the nights she stayed awake, worrying and calculating how to manage. He listened silently, absorbing the full reality of her life. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He had built a life where problems were solved with money, strategy, or effort. But this required understanding, patience, and care. It was not something that could be fixed overnight. It was something he had to approach delicately, thoughtfully, and with respect for her dignity. By the time she had finished speaking, it was late. She was exhausted, her voice soft, her eyes tired. He offered a gentle smile, letting her know that he was there and that he believed her. Thank you for trusting me with this, he said quietly. I know it is not easy to share, but I want to help. We will figure this out together. She nodded slowly, unsure, but relieved to have finally spoken. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she did not feel entirely alone. Someone had seen her struggle, acknowledged it, and cared. The walls she had built around herself had not been breached recklessly. They had been met with patience and kindness. Over the next few days, he thought carefully about what to do. He did not rush. He did not want to overwhelm her or make her feel indebted. He realized that helping her required more than money. It required understanding, planning, and respect for her autonomy. He observed how she worked, listened to her concerns, and quietly began considering solutions. He also reflected on his own life. He had spent so many years focused on wealth, efficiency, and control, yet he had never considered how people around him might be struggling. His home was filled with service, but not with understanding. It was filled with appearances, not empathy. For the first time, he realized that real success was not just about what he had accomplished, but about the difference he could make in the lives of others. When she returned to work the following morning, he greeted her with a warm, calm smile. She returned it cautiously, but he could see a small shift in her demeanor. She moved with slightly less tension, and her hands were steadier. She was still carrying her burdens, but she no longer felt completely invisible. Someone knew, someone cared, and that mattered more than she expected. He continued to approach her days with quiet attentiveness. Small gestures, a cup of tea, a kind word, a gentle acknowledgement of her efforts, helped. He let her lead the conversation when she felt ready, never pushing, never rushing. Slowly, trust began to grow. She spoke more openly, and he listened with patience. For the first time, he realized that seeing someone, truly seeing them, was as important as any action or solution. It was the first step toward change. And change, he knew, had to be done with care, respect, and understanding. By the end of the week, she had shared most of her story. He now understood why she cried every night. Her son's illness, the financial pressure, and the feeling of isolation had been almost too much to bear. But he also saw something else. Her courage, her determination, and her unspoken love for her child. She had carried so much alone, and now someone had finally noticed, and in noticing, he felt something change within himself too. He realized that true empathy required more than sympathy. It required attention, patience, and willingness to act thoughtfully. He had learned that wealth and power were not enough. Understanding, human connection, and care were equally, if not more, important. He did not yet have all the solutions, but he had begun. And for her, this small beginning meant hope. Hope that she was not alone. Hope that her struggles were recognized. And hope that someone cared enough to stand by her side as she faced the challenges ahead. For the first time in a long while, both of them felt something they had been missing. The quiet relief of being seen, heard, and understood. After hearing her story, he spent the next few days thinking carefully about what he could do. He had money, influence, and resources that could solve problems almost instantly. But he also knew that simply throwing money at her struggles would not fix everything. She needed more than temporary relief. She needed dignity, support, and a sense of stability. He wanted to help, but he wanted to do it in a way that honored her courage and independence. He began by observing her routines and the ways her responsibilities weighed on her. She worked tirelessly, not only in his house, but at other jobs to make ends meet. Her son's illness required constant attention, frequent hospital visits, and medications that were expensive and difficult to manage. She had spent months trying to juggle everything alone, sacrificing sleep, comfort, and sometimes even meals just to keep her family afloat. The more he learned, the more he realized how much pressure she had carried quietly, never asking for help. One afternoon, he quietly left a small envelope on the kitchen counter while she was organizing the pantry. It contained a note with a simple message: "I want to help. Please trust me." He did not attach any money or offer immediate solutions. He wanted her to feel safe and respected, not rushed or overwhelmed. When she found it, she paused, staring at the paper, unsure what to make of it. After a long moment, she tucked it into her apron pocket without saying a word. Over the next few days, he began offering small, practical forms of help. He arranged for her son's appointments to be handled more efficiently, ensuring she didn't have to spend hours on the phone coordinating care. He quietly covered some of the medical costs, but in a way that preserved her dignity. She never had to feel embarrassed or beholden. He also adjusted her schedule at work so that she had more flexibility to spend time with her child. These changes were subtle, yet they relieved a burden she had carried for months. He did not announce these actions or make them public. There was no fanfare, no speeches. He believed that helping someone should not draw attention to them, but rather provide them the quiet support they needed. His goal was not to show generosity, but to restore a sense of control and peace to her life. As the days passed, he noticed changes. She moved with slightly less tension. She smiled more easily, though still cautiously. Her hands trembled less often, and her eyes, though tired, held a faint light that had been missing for months. He realized that even small acts of understanding and support could make a real difference. One evening, he invited her to sit with him for a cup of tea. It was the first time he had done so without any pretense of supervision or instruction. They sat across from each other in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light over the space. He asked her gently about her son, listening as she spoke with more openness than before. She described his progress, the small victories in his recovery, and the moments that brought her hope. He listened quietly, offering encouragement without judgment, without trying to solve everything immediately. "Thank you," she said softly. I don't know how to say this, but it feels different. You actually listen." He nodded. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "I should have noticed sooner. I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together." Over time, he took additional steps to help her life feel less overwhelming. He connected her with doctors who were not only skilled but compassionate, understanding the challenges of her situation. He arranged for a social worker to assist with any other services she might need, such as temporary childcare or support groups. Each action was carefully thought out, aimed at reducing stress without making her feel helpless. She began to trust him more with each passing day. She still carried worries and fears, but she no longer faced them entirely alone. She felt a sense of relief, subtle at first, then growing stronger. The quiet act of kindness and support gave her hope, allowing her to breathe more deeply, sleep more soundly, and focus on her son's recovery. He also realized something profound about himself. He had spent his life building success and accumulating wealth, believing that control and discipline were the keys to happiness. Yet he had never understood the impact of truly noticing another person, of seeing someone struggle without judgment, and offering support without expectation. He discovered that helping someone was not just about providing resources. It was about listening, observing, and caring in ways that respected their humanity. There were moments of hesitation and uncertainty. She worried that he might think she was weak, that he would lose respect for her if he fully understood her life. He had to reassure her, over and over, that strength was not only in self-reliance, but also in asking for help when it was needed. Slowly, those reassurances sank in. She began to speak more openly about her fears, knowing that he would listen without judgment. One afternoon, he asked her to join him in reviewing the household schedule. He wanted to adjust her workload so that she could have regular breaks and some time to herself. She hesitated, but he explained that this was not charity. It was fairness, a way to ensure she could take care of herself while still managing her responsibilities. She agreed, and over the next weeks, he implemented small changes that improved her daily life significantly. He also encouraged her to consider community resources and support networks. At first, she resisted, worried about pride and independence. But he reminded her that accepting help was not a weakness, and that she could still maintain dignity while improving her situation. Slowly, she began to connect with local programs that provided guidance and assistance to families in similar situations. As her confidence grew, he noticed another change. Her son's health began to improve more steadily. The stress that had weighed heavily on her began to ease, allowing her to focus on care, love, and nurturing rather than constant worry. Her smiles became more frequent, her laughter more genuine, and her steps lighter. It was a transformation that, while gradual, was unmistakable. Through this process, he also learned the value of patience. Change did not happen overnight. Some days, setbacks occurred, appointments delayed, bills arriving unexpectedly, worries creeping back. But each time, he remained present, steady, and supportive. He discovered that real help was consistent, quiet, and enduring. It was not about grand gestures or one-time solutions. It was about commitment, understanding, and shared humanity. One evening, after a long day, they sat together quietly. He poured tea for both of them, and she accepted it with a small, genuine smile. They did not need to speak much. The quiet was comfortable, a sign of trust and mutual respect. She no longer felt the crushing isolation that had haunted her nights. He no longer felt the helplessness he had experienced when he first saw her cry. Together, they had created a space of understanding, support, and hope. He realized that the impact of these actions went beyond the immediate needs. By helping her in ways that preserved dignity and encouraged independence, he had changed the trajectory of her life. She was no longer merely surviving. She was beginning to thrive, able to care for her child while also finding moments of rest, joy, and peace. At the same time, he reflected on his own life. His home, once a place of sterile perfection, had become a place of real connection. He had learned that wealth and control were not the ultimate markers of success. True value came from noticing others, caring for them thoughtfully, and acting with empathy. The experience had opened his eyes to the quiet struggles of people all around him, and he began to think about ways to extend this understanding beyond his household. Over the weeks and months, the bond between them grew stronger. It was not based on dependence or obligation, but on trust, respect, and shared humanity. He learned to see her not just as a housekeeper, but as a courageous, resilient person who had faced overwhelming challenges and emerged stronger. She learned that asking for help did not diminish her strength. It revealed it. The house, once cold and orderly, now felt alive. There was warmth, connection, and a sense of shared purpose. He continued to act quietly, supporting her in practical ways, while also offering encouragement, understanding, and a listening ear. Each small gesture added up, building a foundation of stability and hope that could withstand inevitable challenges of life. He also realized that true change required humility. He had to set aside pride, assumptions, and the belief that money alone could solve every problem. He had to listen, observe, and learn from her experience. And in doing so, he discovered something he had never expected. Helping someone else, with care and respect, could change him just as much as it changed her. By the time the next month arrived, her life had shifted noticeably. The tension in her shoulders had eased. Her steps were lighter. Her laughter, though cautious at first, was more frequent. And most importantly, she no longer cried alone every night. She had support, guidance, and a sense of hope that had been absent for far too long. He knew there was still work to do. Challenges would continue, bills would arrive, and her son's health would require ongoing attention. But now, she was not facing these challenges alone, and he had learned the most important lesson, that empathy, patience, and thoughtful action could transform lives in ways that money alone never could. He had acted quietly, carefully, and with respect for her dignity. In doing so, he had changed not just her life, but his own. He realized that helping someone, truly helping, required seeing them, understanding them, and standing beside them in their struggles. And in that process, both of them had discovered the quiet power of human connection, resilience, and hope. By the time the next few months passed, the changes in her life were becoming clear. Her son's health had improved steadily, thanks to the consistent care, attention, and medical support she could now afford. The weight of constant fear had lifted just enough for her to breathe a little easier. She was still cautious, still careful, but the tightness in her shoulders had loosened. The quiet hope she had been searching for had begun to take root. The man noticed it immediately. When she arrived at work, she moved with more energy, her steps lighter. She laughed occasionally at small things, a sound that had been rare before. Even her eyes, which had once carried the constant shadow of worry, now reflected a glimmer of relief. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to him, it was everything. Every evening when he returned home, he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, not for himself, but because she was no longer invisible, no longer alone in carrying her burdens. One afternoon, he invited her to sit in the garden. The sun was warm, the air fresh, and the house behind him felt peaceful. He poured tea into 2 cups, setting one in front of her. She accepted it, her hand steady for the first time in months. He didn't say much at first. They just sat quietly, letting the calmness of the garden fill the space between them. After a while, she spoke. "I never imagined it could be like this," she said softly. "That someone could see me, really see me, and care enough to help without making me feel like I was weak." Her voice carried relief, almost disbelief, as if she were testing herself to make sure it was real. He nodded gently. "You've been carrying a lot on your own. You deserved help a long time ago. You didn't have to do it all alone." She smiled faintly, her eyes misting with tears. "I always thought I had to, that there was no other way. But now, I see that there is a way to carry some of the weight without losing yourself. He felt a warmth in his chest. The journey they had taken together had changed both of them. She had gained support, hope, and confidence, and he had learned what true empathy meant. Not just seeing people's struggles, but helping them navigate life with dignity and respect. Over the next weeks, he continued to assist her quietly. He arranged for her son's schoolwork and health care to be managed smoothly, ensuring she could focus on both recovery and quality time with him. She no longer had to run herself ragged, trying to solve every problem alone. The relief in her movements and in her voice was unmistakable. Her world, once dominated by fear and exhaustion, had begun to feel livable again. One evening, after a long day, she came into the living room, carrying her son's favorite book. She settled into the chair near the window, her child snuggled close. She read softly, her voice steady, her eyes bright with focus and love. Watching her, he realized how much resilience she carried, how much courage it took to endure months of struggle without giving up. And now, with support, that courage was flourishing rather than being buried under exhaustion. He understood that helping someone was not about grand gestures or public recognition. It was about noticing the small, daily battles, stepping in with care, and respecting the person's strength. Each quiet act had added up, creating a ripple that transformed her life in ways he had not fully anticipated. The house no longer felt like a place of mere routines and polished surfaces. It felt like a home filled with human warmth, trust, and connection. One morning, she shared something that made him pause. "I never thought I could feel normal again," she said softly. "Not just surviving, but really living. I can sleep at night without that dread pressing on me. I can spend time with my son without constantly worrying about what I can't control. And I can work here without the fear that it will all collapse." He smiled quietly. "You earned this," he said. "It wasn't about luck or me or anyone else. You kept going, even when it seemed impossible. I just helped you see that you didn't have to do it all alone." Her smile grew more genuine, her eyes reflecting gratitude and relief. "I never thought someone would care enough to actually notice, to help me quietly, without making me feel ashamed." He nodded. That's all anyone really needs. To be seen, to be respected, and to know they're not facing life alone. Over time, the bond between them deepened, not in a way that was forced or dependent, but in the mutual respect and understanding they shared. He no longer saw her only as the person who managed a household. He saw her as a resilient, determined human being who had endured more than most could imagine and had emerged stronger. She no longer saw him as merely a wealthy employer, but as someone who genuinely cared, who had taken the time to notice and act with patience and dignity. One weekend, he suggested they take a short trip outside the city to enjoy some fresh air. At first, she hesitated, worried about leaving her son and managing responsibilities. But he insisted that her son could come along and that everything else would be taken care of. She finally agreed. The day of the trip, she laughed freely, played with her son without distraction, and even let herself relax completely. It was the first time in years she had experienced a day without constant worry or fear. On the way back, she turned to him quietly. "I can't remember the last time I felt like this," she said softly. "Like life wasn't just a struggle, but something I could actually enjoy." He nodded, smiling. "It's been a long road, but you've carried it well. You deserve these moments." He realized something profound. Helping someone did not just change their life. It changed his own perspective on wealth, success, and what mattered in life. He had always measured achievement by material success and efficiency. Now he understood that true fulfillment came from seeing the people around you, understanding their struggles, and helping them without judgment or expectation. That was a lesson he would carry forever. Over the next months, her son continued to recover fully, his energy returning, his laughter filling their home. She moved with ease through her days, balancing work, care, and personal time. Her life had shifted from constant anxiety to one filled with hope, stability, and love. The man noticed a transformation not just in her, but in the atmosphere of the home itself. It was no longer a place of silent effort and tension, but one of warmth, trust, and shared humanity. Even small gestures, a smile exchanged over a cup of tea, a story told in the garden, A quiet conversation at night added to the sense of life and connection. One evening, after a particularly joyful day spent with her son at the park, she returned home and paused at the door. She turned to him and said softly, "I don't know how to thank you enough. You didn't just help me survive, you helped me live again." He shook his head gently. "You did all the hard work," he said. "I just helped carry a little of the weight. You were the one who kept going, even when it seemed impossible." She smiled, her eyes shining. "I used to cry every night thinking I couldn't make it. Now I cry sometimes, but only because of happiness. Because I finally feel like there's a future I can handle, a life I can live fully with my son." He felt a quiet satisfaction, deeper than anything he had ever experienced through business success or material achievement. Helping her had given him a new understanding of life, one built not on control or wealth, but on care, empathy, and connection. He realized that true success was not measured by what he had, but by the lives he touched, and the difference he could make quietly, thoughtfully, and with respect. As weeks turned into months, their routine settled into a balanced rhythm. She managed her responsibilities with newfound confidence. Her son thrived under her care, enjoying childhood moments that had once seemed impossible. And he continued to provide quiet support, always respecting her independence, never overstepping, always attentive to her needs and her dignity. The man reflected often on the journey. He had entered her life noticing something as simple as tears at night, and from that small observation had grown a profound journey of empathy, care, and human connection. He had learned that wealth and power were not enough to touch lives meaningfully. True impact came from listening, observing, and acting with patience and respect. One evening, he sat quietly in the living room as she read to her son. He watched the two of them, the laughter, the gentle teasing, the love that filled the space. He realized that everything he had done had been worth it, not for recognition, not for self-congratulation, but because he had helped someone regain hope, stability, and joy. And as he watched them, he understood that life's true meaning lay not in possessions or achievements, but in these quiet human connections. Helping someone to carry their burden, to find their strength, to smile again, this was the kind of success that mattered most. She had cried every night when no one was looking, burdened by fear, worry, and exhaustion. Now, those nights were gone. She had hope. She had support. She had a future she could face with strength and courage. And he, in turn, had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that noticing, understanding, and quietly helping another human being could transform lives in ways that wealth alone never could. The house, once a place of mere order and efficiency, had become a home full of warmth, trust, and love. And in that transformation, both of them had discovered something profound: the power of empathy, the importance of care, and the life-changing strength of truly seeing another person. For the first time in a long time, they both knew what it meant to feel hope, peace, and quiet joy, and it was a feeling neither of them would ever forget.